All right, so let's begin. Oh, yeah, that always helps. Thank you. So let's begin and let's talk about the Massey case. And I'm going to stand in the back of the room because I got to take this mask off. It is driving me nuts. So if I stand far enough away from everybody, I'm hoping that I'm excused by a loud. I'll project louder if I need to be. I don't think I need to. Sierra, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the Massey case. What happened at Massey Energy?
The mine exploded.
The mine exploded. I remember watching this on TV and just how, and it was tragic. Because it was the first time where I was really old enough to kind of realize the implications of, I was old enough, I saw Challenger on TV, to date myself. I remember we as a school were in this big gymnasium watching it on the big screen, right? But the Massey Energy, I was working here at ISU when this happened. So, mine accident, okay? Do mine accidents happen? They happen unfortunately happen quite a bit. So why are we having a conversation about this particular case? What is it about this case that makes it so noteworthy?
There was like a lot leading up to this that was wrong.
There were a lot of indications that this was an incredibly tragic but preventable accident. And I think that's the big case is what could have been done to prevent this? And the other big problem was so many of the people involved pointed their fingers at other people and said, they are the reason this happened. No, they are. And everybody was pointing fingers at everybody else. So let's begin. Now again, and like the question says on the screen, only given the facts described in the case, nothing else that you might know personally or have looked up, should the management of Massey Energy be held morally responsible for the deaths of the 29 miners? So let's begin by bringing up, if you can, in your textbook, let's go back, and I believe it's in chapter 2 of the text. And let us take a look at what does that mean? When we say somebody is morally responsible, let's go back and take a look at what if I can remember my passwords. Nope. Okay, I'm not bringing it up on my screen. That's why I have my computer in my office. All right, so somebody who has it, let's see if we can bring up chapter 2. And actually, let's go a little bit further back. Let's try chapter 1. Let's go to, yeah. So we're in chapter 1.5 of the textbook. And I apologize, I can't bring it up on the screen. Okay? But in chapter 1.
If you give me admin rights, I can share it so that it's still on the big screen.
That would be helpful. Give me just a second. That should.
Oh, there you go. That just makes anybody, you wouldn't even have to finger if it was.
Can you see? Perfect. So let's take a look at what does it mean to have moral responsibility or duty. So let's go to the next page. When is a person morally responsible? Now we're going to act as though Massey Energy Corporation, even though it is what? A business made up of a bunch of people, we're going to act as though Massey Energy Corporation is one individual in terms of determining moral responsibility. Why would that matter? What do you think, Guy? Why does it matter if we define Massey Energy Corporation as a company of a lot of people or as one person itself?
Well, I mean, it defers, it kind of solves the issue of everybody pointing fingers at themselves, because that was a big thing of like, oh, well, it was Blankenship and his blah, 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 or oh, it was so-and-so. Whereas collectively, if we look at everybody in management that could have had a say in the issue, then it limits down like pointing fingers and can just let us see the actual, like, what happened with the company that made this occur.
Exactly. It dissolves responsibility if I can have more than one person responsible, because then it becomes very difficult to say who was the final person who had the choice of whether or not this thing was done or not. It diffuses responsibility. Okay, so we're going to act as though Massey is one person for the case of this discussion. All right, so again, just to review, a person is morally responsible when A, they caused or helped to cause the situation or failed to prevent the situation when they could and should have. 2, the person knew what they were or were not doing. And 3, the person did this of their own free will. Okay, so let's see some arguments. So if we come back to Massey, as a company, did they have causality? Did they contribute to let's see. Oh, I just need to share mine. Okay. There we go. That's the problem. Okay, so did Massey, oh, and then I'm going to share, see it, yeah. I will get this all figured out eventually, I promise. All right. Did Massey have causality? Did they cause, in part, either by action or inaction, the events of the mine explosion?
Yes, argue for inaction.
By inaction, and specifically what? What inaction?
They avoided like really maintaining a really good level of safety standards, and they kind of just went with the bare minimum that could say, like, we'll stay running if we do these couple of things, but we're gonna cut costs by not fixing these really important safety issues.
And
Okay.
things like federal agents found issues with ventilation, like ventilation wasn't done correctly, and they found that methane sensors weren't recalibrated. So just like things like stacked up on top of each other.
Okay, so causality is a check mark. Okay, next was knowledge. Did they know that they were not, that their failure to act could lead to realistically lead to the consequence that happened?
They claim they didn't, but it would seem pretty unlikely that they would.
Okay, why would they claim that they didn't know?
To try to rid themselves of any blame.
Because they realized if they said, we knew that we should have done this and we didn't, then, you know, you've just written your insurance check, right? You just claimed I'm guilty as charged, okay? But is there any evidence to suggest that Massey really didn't know that doing the things that they were doing would contribute to the significance of the accident that occurred?
I would say if there's more evidence that supports that they did know because they were obviously informed by these safety people, like, hey, there's issues here, like this could create a potential issue in the future, like this is a problem that you need to fix.
And like the obvious things with the union was talked about how they have a certain person assigned that would, that was with management, that would walk people around and not allow them to talk to the workers. Like that in itself is like, okay, that kind of sounds like you know what something's up. So, I don't know.
Creating that culture too kind of contributes to the responsibility.
Okay. And then finally, freedom. Did they have an alternative? Could they have done what needed to be done to fix? Okay.
Yeah.
So what would that suggest in terms of, can the management of Massey Energy Company be held morally responsible for the death? This would seem to suggest yes, if based on those three principles. Would there be any arguments that would say no?
One I can think of is that they weren't free to do it because they were forced to by the boss. But still.
And that's still like the company, right?
See, the management of the company, if these individuals chose not to, and this gets at where, this is why defining a corporation as one person rather than individuals, because this is where you were talking about with Blankenship.
Really.
That did Blankenship really have the freedom because he needed to keep his job, therefore he was at the mercy of Massey deciding whether or not to implement the safety features or to update the safety features, knowing we're running at a loss right now, the mine is in danger of being shut down because of costs. Therefore, if we spend money on this, it's money we don't have that could cause us to go out of business. Okay. Supposing nothing more is learned about the explosion other than what was described in the case, do you think Don Blankenship should be held morally responsible? Okay, so again, let's go back. What are the three questions? Causality, which means what?
Proven action or actions that cause it.
Were their actions either the cause or the failure to act the cause for the deaths? What do you think, Sierra?
I think that he did know that something could have happened. I'm reading in the textbook where it's talking about the company background. And so they knew that there was like the big crack in the ground that was leaking in. I've lost it in the text, but with his history of making the coal profits come before the employees, it seems like he has causality for, I don't know if he should be, totally held responsible, but he had evidence proving that he should do something about it and he chose not to.
Okay. What about knowledge? Did he know what he was choosing to do or not do in this case? Do you think he had adequate knowledge that there were safety concerns at the mine?
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, freedom. Was he in a position to be able to act to take care of the situation?
I would say yes. I mean, he's since he's a CEO, he's probably the main shareholder, which means he, in the end, can make the executive decisions that would say, hey, we need to close the mine down for a week to make all these necessary changes or make some of them or whatever. I think he did have the choice to, even if he would have had some kind of backlash from the board or whatever.
Okay. And then finally, the Mining Safety and Health Associate, is that, I think, Mine Safety and Health?
Yeah.
Okay, which is a government organization that is a watchdog group. Their intent is to enforce specific safety practices at mines. This mine had been approved by inspectors from the Mine Safety Association. Based on that knowledge, again, should they be morally responsible, at least in part, for the death of the miners? Did they have causality? Did their actions, by passing off or allowing Massey to continue in violation of mine safety regulations, did that contribute to the death of the 29 miners?
Yes.
Yes, it did. Okay, did they know that passing Massey on these things could result in higher than necessary possible death? Okay, now we have to accept the idea mining is inherently dangerous. So one of the questions we ask that's not on this list, do the 29 miners hold some moral responsibility for their own death?
Yeah.
Are they, okay,
To some
They
extent.
accept the risk.
they accept it. Did they know that there was a risk?
From what most of these miners describe in their testimonies, likely yes.
Okay, so they knew that it was unsafe to work there. Did their actions cause or failure to act cause the death, their own death or the death of others?
That I'm not so sure about, because they took steps to try to fix things, but they were shot down. Like some people like brought things up and then were promptly fired.
Okay.
So,
It could be argued that they could have whistleblown, but that's a huge cost to them.
Okay, so it's still, they're still morally responsible because they knew that these things happened and they did not fix them. But that could be mitigated by the threat to their livelihood. It minimizes the level of responsibility they carry, but the fact that they did not go and continue to push to get these things fixed. For example, like you said, when the union representatives were walking around the mine, the fact that nobody said, hey, I'm going to contact my local union rep to let them know this is happening so that when the bigwigs come, that they can say something about this. They still hold a moral responsibility for that. It's to some degree excused. Sorry, I wish right there, but nevertheless, it still suggests that they have some responsibility for their own death, which I know can sound incredibly uncomfortable. That we're saying, well, you know, it is, but it's the same thing. My son, for example, went over to City Creek, and he and a couple friends, they were coming back home late at night, and they wanted to get to the car before it got too dark because none of them had flashlights. So they were running down City Creek. At one point, my son trips and manages to slide on his hands and knees down a gravel hill. And he comes home, knees are bloody, arm is bloody, hands are bloody. I'm going, oh crap, I'm gonna have to give this kid stitches. And I'm looking at him going, well, why did this happen? Well, we were trying to get this. And I looked at it and I said, you realize that you hold some responsibility. I don't mean to rub this in because I can tell you're in serious pain, but you realize that you bear some moral responsibility for this accident. And the reason I brought that up is because he said, well, I can't go to school tomorrow. Well, you have a final exam. Well, but I'm in pain and I hurt. Yeah, but you still you hold moral responsibility. So it's sometimes uncomfortable to assign moral responsibility, yet nevertheless we have to. Okay, so let's take a look at, so what do we learn from the Massey case? Why is it valuable to discuss whether or not somebody holds moral responsibility? Because if we look at what we just said in these three sections, what have we decided? We've decided Massey has moral responsibility. We agree that Don Blankenship has moral responsibility. We believe the Mine Safety Board has responsibility. To a degree, even the miners have moral responsibility. So does that mean it's like offsetting penalty? No penalties will be assessed first down? No.
Life isn't football.
Life is not football. But what does this, but you know, not to speak lightly of this, but so what does this mean? What do we do with this knowledge? If we're saying that all these groups are morally responsible, what does that help us? What does it do for us? Does it do anything?
I think to some degree it tells us where to start because you can see who has most responsibility in this case.
Okay, so we recognize that even though all four groups hold moral responsibility for the deaths of the miners, we could suggest that the degree of moral responsibility is not equally shared among all four of these groups. So let me ask you the question, who holds the greatest degree of moral responsibility? The company, the manager, the oversight, or the workers? What do you think, Guy?
I don't know, because I think it probably depends on like the point of view of like each person. I think it'd be down more to like the management of the company and then the management of the health association that cleared it. Because ultimately, if the health association had come in and said, look, it is not safe, they have full government-backed authority to close down a mine for a week until they get the safety regulations up to code. And management, likewise, has the ability to close down the mine until they get health up to like snuff. And so while, yeah, each like individual, quote unquote, technically has responsibility, right? Every miner, every manager, everybody, the general oversight, I think, holds more responsibility. I think it's split probably between management and then the mining safety association, because ultimately those two have the most weight in say of what goes on. That has the highest majority voice and isn't just individuals trying to, you know, say against an entire majority. It's the company management or the safety association saying, hey, we need to be smarter about this. So I'd say it would be down between those two.
Okay. Does anybody else have a different opinion or agree or disagree with this?
I think I would agree, because in the text it says that the mine would have been shut down if it was not for a computer glitch for the mining and health.
Mining safety and health. Okay.
So I think that I would personally give them a little more grace because of that, because how can they foresee a computer glitch? Okay, but I generally agree that those two hold a lot of responsibility.
Okay. Sierra, would you add anything to that?
No, I agree.
Okay, I think that one thing that Guy brought up that I think is most helpful is of all of the parties involved, there are two that have the most freedom to act because they have independence of action. The corporate management, they are the ones that everybody answers to, right? They don't have a boss, they are the boss. The government oversight committee, the MISHA or whatever, however you, yeah, MISHA, they are, again, the boss. They are the health and safety board that determines, and as a government, there is nobody above them in terms of people that they have to answer to. I think that if you have that level of authority, then you hold a higher level of moral responsibility. Don Blankenship had to answer. He was the mine supervisor, but he had to answer to somebody. The miners had to answer to people. So I think that that is a fantastic description, guys, so well done on that. Okay, so let's take just a few minutes then, just because we're running out of time. Take a look at the second case study. We're talking about Gene Elliott, who works for, I think he works for B&C Steel, correct?
He worked for,
He was the one that was overseeing,
Maybe Bridge.
what's that?
He worked for Maybe Bridge,
Okay,
and then he was contracted out to Turner Construction and B&C Steel.
okay, so these two companies are the ones that are installing the bridge. Elliott is if I'm thinking correct, he's kind of like a site supervisor and is overseeing this and has discovered several times that the folks that are building this bridge are doing it incorrectly.
B&C Steel has shown patterns of negligence.
Okay, for example, they're putting the screws on the wrong side. They're doing all of these things wrong that are going to result in extremely high costs if they are allowed to stand. And so like several times he stops construction to fix things and does so manually because he doesn't trust the workers, okay? At the very end of this, they're installing this bridge and he sees that the bridge is starting to slip. And if it slips, it's gonna fall into the river and be lost. He goes through and does the OSHA standardized signal, everybody stop everything, and jumps on the bridge to fix it. For some reason, the crane that is putting it in place slips and the bridge moves, causing him to fall and has some pretty grotesque injuries that end up being $2.4 million. And what's interesting is nobody contests the costs of this. It's like everyone looked at it and said, yeah, you pretty much can ask for whatever you want because that was a really bad accident. But the question is, so they basically, none of the attorneys argued that $2.4 million in terms of a settlement, nobody argues that that's inappropriate. But it does leave the question, who should get the bill? Should Turner Construction get the, why would Turner Construction be considered a possible target for being responsible for the settlement? Who are they?
They're like the parent company behind it all.
Okay, they're the ones that are running the project of rebuilding the bridge. So what would make them responsible for potential for Elliott's injury?
They were the ones who had the most control over the location where this bridge was being installed.
It was their project. Okay, so it's just like being the homeowner. If I'm the homeowner, anything that happens on my property, even if I'm not there, I'm still considered the one responsible for the property. So that would be Turner's argument. Okay, what about B&C Steel?
They're the workers on the ground.
Okay, what would make the argument that they are responsible?
Because they're the ones who are doing things improperly or not following safety protocols and things like that.
Okay, and then the book also asks a question, is it possible that Elliott is himself responsible because of his own carelessness? How was he careless? The book describes the situation. He calls for everybody stop, everyone stay where they are, and then what does he do?
He jumped on the bridge.
He goes and runs out onto the bridge to go and fix the problem. If there was really a problem and he had told everybody else to stop, what should that also mean for him?
He should have stopped as well.
He should have stopped as well. We should have secured the bridge or whatever. The bridge shifted and moved and fell And we don't know, maybe Elliot himself caused it to do so because of him running out onto the unstable bridge. So just like with the last one, and just because we need to finish this up pretty quickly, which one of those three do you think is the most likely responsible group? Turner, BNC Steel, or Elliott?
I think for the specific, like, the incident itself and the injury itself, I'd have to say Elliot. Because in this specific situation, he saw the problem, and instead of calling it off and talking to supervisors, be like, okay, there's this issue, we need to get it fixed before we can keep working. He just decided to go like full gas, like not really thinking as much, because as a manager or foreman or whatever job he was filling, he knew that there was
I
protocol
out onto the bridge to save it. Sorry,
Like-
Guy, I talked right over you.
No, you're good. He knew that there had to have been protocol. If he called for everybody stop, there would have had to have been some form of protocol for him to follow to get the operation to start again. But instead, he just called everybody off and then was like, you know what, I'm going to handle this myself. And he saw the problem, and instead of being smart about it, he just ran headfirst into the problem without any forethought. And so I think for the injury, it was Elliot. Maybe for the crane slipping, that might have been somebody else. But for his specific injury, it was Elliot himself.
Okay. His action exposed himself to the danger of falling off the bridge. If he had obeyed the OSHA all stop and had stopped himself, he wouldn't have been on the bridge, therefore he would not have fallen. Okay? Anybody want to make an argument about Turner Construction?
I could see how it could be Turner Construction, seeing as they're the all oversight over the project. I would hope that they would be having people on site paying attention to safety and things like that. But it seems like in this case they weren't. And I know that's not necessarily their job, but as like the parent company, you would think that would be part of their responsibility.
They're the ones that have the insurance, and their insurance is likely what's going to have to pay for Elliot's injury. Okay? Anybody want to argue about BNC Steel? Sounds like these folks really just weren't up to the job and they were over their heads. So as bad as they were, it just sounds like they're like kids. They can't be held responsible because they didn't have a knowledge of what they were doing to realize just how bad they were doing things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just having like one really knowledgeable person on the site, and that's not like direct management can sometimes lead to a problem like that. Because sure, they know everything, but they might not know the exact way to.
Well, and it also sounds like Elliot had this attitude or behavior. He would constantly be, I've got to fix this thing. I'm going to become the hero by personally swapped. For example, I think it said that he personally swapped all of the nuts and bolts that they were doing because they put them in wrong. He didn't have them go back and do it. He did it himself.
The problem with that is like how they're going to learn how to do it then.
Uh-huh.
They're going to keep making problems if they just know you're going to come in and fix it.
And he has overstepped his bounds as the project manager by doing things that were not part of his portfolio. That exposes himself to unnecessary risk and therefore. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We will see you all on Tuesday.